RPG. So I'll be your facilitator slash speaker for today. And my name is Jay Mata. Just a little bit about my background. I'm an avid gamer, just like I'm presuming most of you are. Okay. I also used to be an English teacher. Specifically, I talked part of the story component of helping students write. Okay, and if you're wondering how difficult that may be, imagine trying to convince a lot of teenage girls not to read Twilight, and you gotta understand that.
Pasalamat ka kung Twilight, buti hindi BL.
Yeah, I have lots of stories about that. Okay, so essentially, what I want to deal with is talking about how to construct better stories for RPGs. Okay, and for those of you who have not seen the publicity materials, but essentially, the idea about it is, writing stories is already a difficult task, right? I think we can all agree about that. The problem with RPGs is the very nature of it is very different. If you were a director of a movie, it's so easy to get your way. If you were an author, even more so, you're on your own. Whatever you say is gone because nobody can, maybe your editor might have something to say, but for the most part, you're in control. RPGs, role-playing games, are different, right? You have players, or as I mentioned in my write-up, they're unpredictable co-authors.
Chaos generators.
I want to be more positive than rather negative. Okay? I'd rather have a positive one. The point is, but the point is, you construct this whole story, and then suddenly your players
they're the monkeys with the time.
Like, they want, I want to go this direction. No, the story's going this direction. So what do we do with them?
So do you want to explore?
Basically, this is what this talk about. It's not just about. It's actually the talk. Guys, sorry, lower the volume. We're going to be talking about two things. The first half of the talk is really going to talk about how to write. No, not write. That's wrong. How to construct a story. It is not about how to write better. Okay, people are far better qualified for that kind of talk than I am. So it's all about how we construct a story, a good story. Okay, and the second half is how we can use those techniques and apply them to role-playing games. Because let's face it, you're not the only author of your game. You have players who will bring it to directions you did not anticipate, you did not expect, and we're going to talk about how to both preempt that and react to that. Okay? So some things to know. One, I'd like to know who here are game masters or dungeon masters. Okay, or what?
I've run.
So we don't have any players here. Everyone more or less wants
the group dissolved.
Okay.
I'm also a player.
That's true. Okay, so basically, we're going to talk about how to write stories. But more than that, it's all about breaking the mold of what is expected to us and trying to make more effective stories in the process. Okay. The other caveat slash warning I have to give is I'm very much influenced by the lectures and writing workshops of Orson Scott Card. And for those of you that know, he's a bit of a bigot. Okay, so I don't follow his beliefs. I just feel that his workshops and his philosophies regarding how to write better stories are very useful in this regard. So we're going to be talking a lot about what he does. Yes.
I would use the word methodology.
Methodology. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. So also I'd like to warn I'm incredibly shitty at making PowerPoints. Okay, so please, I'd like to apologize for this. Yeah. But anyway, this is the outline of what we're going to be talking about. So, getting your audience involved emotionally in your stories. The mice quotient of stories, that's where we go to Orson Scott Card's philosophies of how a story should be. How to nest your mice quotients into your story. Then we go to the RPG part, the story tips for RPGs, and the collaborative approach. How do you write your stories with your players? Now, as mentioned by DJ said something about chaos generators. Now, I want to be more positive about it, meaning I don't want to say, okay, how do you fight the chaos of your players? I'd rather be more positive, okay, the players want to do this, how do you work with it rather than work against it? Okay? But we will talk ever so briefly what to do when you have those kinds of trolls in your game. Okay, there are ways around that. Yes?
Jay, is there a place in the conversation about the general trend of the hobby? Because in the early games was basically railroad, which was basically
yes. Actually,
and then it became meta plot in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see resurgence of sandbox and hex scroll.
Actually, funny you mentioned that because we'll be talking that as the video goes on. Particularly because I will delve in how video games actually influence how tabletop dungeon masters and game masters change the way they write their stories and how we can bring it up. But just a little bit of a caveat, I will be focusing on literary techniques, not video games as a focus. Although I would like to stress that there's nothing wrong with going with that approach, or particularly if your players love the video game style of writing stories. But I want to focus more on what were the techniques that many writers use to write better stories and how we can apply them to ourselves. Okay? So, but yes, that's a very good point. When we go to the Q&A, maybe we can discuss how we can apply those very specific concepts. Alright? So let's first get, how do you get the audience involved? Now, let's ask, one of the things I really talked about is the psychological aspects of, or how we get people invested in. Because really, that's really the ultimate goal of any story. How do you get your readers, your audience, to love your story so much that they get obsessed with it, they get invested in it. So, the audience is invested in the story if the payoff of the story is proportionate to the expectations built by the author. Okay? So stories usually follow this progression. Expectation, the beginning of the story, the build-up, which is the middle, and then the payoff. Now, this becomes really an interesting point because let's look at all the reviews you normally see about the story. When I say story, by the way, I mean catch all. Movies, TV shows, games, books, yada yada. Diba? What are normally bad reviews? What are the common words you see? Plot holes. What else? Poor characterization. What else are the normal things you normally see those kind of reviews?
Cliche.
Sorry?
Cliche.
Sorry?
Cliche.
Cliche. Yeah, actually, it's a very good one. Cliche.
Anticlimactic.
Anticlimactic. Okay. Now, here's the thing. You notice all those kind of complaints, and yet we have stories that have those same problems, but they're seen as a positive, right? You see words like minimalist rather than right? You have to say lacking.
Yes.
Yeah. Or artistic. Or rather, one of the biggest ones I notice is that say, oh, this story has so many plot holes. But then you see another story with a lot of plot holes, and you think, oh, it's not a story, it's a character piece. Right? And it's considered a good story.
It's like an apple.
Now, why is that the case? The reason why, okay, often when a player story says a story is bad, plot holes, lack of character development, etc., it isn't necessarily because it is deficient in a certain area. It is because the payoff doesn't match the expectation. Meaning, what you promised in the beginning is not what you gave them in the end. Okay? Because essentially what does that mean? In other words, what the author wanted and what the audience wanted aren't aligned. So, what do I mean by that? Okay, if you don't have a lot good characterization, it doesn't necessarily mean your bad story is bad. But if what the people wanted was better characterization, and you didn't provide it, then it's a bad story. Okay, so essentially, we have to first get that idea out of the way. Okay, regarding how we make our stories. Now, authors have control over what the audience latches onto by subtle nudges to the aspects the author cares most about. Here's the thing that's very important. Okay, particularly in the world right now with lots of fan fiction, lots of shippers, lots of people to change. Now, what? Readers often latch onto things that we did not expect. But as authors, we do have subtle control over what they want to latch onto. Okay? So, what does that mean? It means if you write a story and you have so many potential hooks that people will latch onto, they have a potential to go off the rails. But a common mistake among storytellers, trying to do too much. The more big concepts you add to the story, the more points audiences can potentially latch onto other than the main focus. Effectively, what am I saying, and what also Scott Card and a lot of writers that are adherents, is the idea of what's called the lean story. Well, I say lean, not small. Okay, a novel can be lean, but the point is, can you write a story and remove excess fat? Okay, because why? If you add excess fat, quote unquote, there are more things you can latch onto, and suddenly you've lost control over the narrative. Yes.
When you mentioned that, what comes to mind for me is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. It's for those who don't know. You have Hamlet, and there are two characters there, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are his college friends.
Yeah.
And their job is to bring him bring him away from, to take him out of Denmark and distract him. Later on, they die. somebody writes an entire movie about these two characters alone, and it intersects with Hamlet.
Yeah. So essentially, fans latched on these two characters. He developed them so much. Now, again, this is a good thing if you want you want people to latch on to things, right? But if you're trying to write a story and you want your ending to be so mind-blowing, it has to match. Okay? So it's very important that the ending is the ultimate payoff. If it doesn't match what you have been building towards, it can seriously undermine the audience perception of what came before. In other words, when I was saying the difference between a minimalist story versus a story that's lacking, it means the same thing. But one is a positive spin, and one's a negative spin on the exact same characteristic. Okay? So, what's the more casual way to look at it? Okay? If you want a big story about how somebody saves the princess, but then you write so much about two side characters that they begin to love that side character, good for them, but bad for you because now they're going to complain, oh, what did you do with these two side characters? Okay? So we gotta practice a more effective way of focusing our stories. Okay, so a good way to get your story organized is to peg your beginning and your ending before you do anything else. Okay? The middle part, the build-up can be changed accordingly, but it's a lot easier to plan. Once you have an idea how you get to that. Okay, so beginning and end first. More importantly, it helps identify what type of story you have and the guidelines to follow what that type of story is. Okay? We're going to be talking about the types of stories. No, I don't mean, oh, this is a murder mystery, this is a love story, this is an adventure. Those are genres. We're going to talk about the types of stories there are in the literary sense. Okay? So, this is where we go to Orson Scott Card's workshop of the mice quotient of a story. Has anyone ever encountered the mice? M-I-C-E. Okay, we're going to talk about that now, and this is where we delve away from RPGs for the next 10 or so minutes, because I want first to talk solely about the concepts of a story. Once we get that, we can now delve deeper on what makes a better story. Okay, so what is the mice quotient? Basically, these are the types. All stories have these four aspects, but the difference is where is your focus. Now, you have to have all four. But which one is dominant is what will determine what type of story you're writing for. So, there are four basic patterns that are present in every story, with varying degrees of emphasis. It is the balance among these factors that determines what sort of characteristics you must have, should have, or can have. Bear in mind, it doesn't just say must have, it should have and can have. In other words, if you know what type of story you have, you know not just what to put in, but what not to put in. Okay? We're talking about lean stories here. Okay? So the four factors, according to Orson Scott Card, are the milieu, the idea, the character, and the event. M-I-C-E, the mice quotients of a story. Now, all stories have different ideas, degrees of what those are. But we're going to talk about them and what are the focuses of each. Okay? So let's start with milieu stories. Oh, sorry, not yet. It is important to know that while a good story is going to all four factors, actually I mentioned this already, a single factor is always dominant, and it's just that single factor that drives the story. The rest just make the story richer, but never overshadows the primary factor. Once they overshadow it, you've lost it. Okay? You've lost it. You lost the alignment between what the readers want, because you focus in so much, the readers now invest on that. They don't care anymore about the primary. Okay? We'll delve into examples of these things. Yes.
So you're saying that there are four categories?
Yes.
So there
of types of stories. Now, all stories have all four aspects.
But the dominant one
determins what type of stories you're writing.
So we're talking about milieu stories, idea stories.
Yes. Character stories and event stories. Yes.
Okay.
And how much or how little you need to put on each one.
So it's basically a matter of balancing.
Actually, a lot less balancing and more on focus. And everything else just supplements a primary one.
Right. Sorry, that was
Yeah.
It's like you have a recipe and then you have ingredients you put in.
Yeah.
To determine the flavor.
Yeah, but one thing is always supposed to be the idea, right?
Right. So it's like if it's a lamb dish, you'd expect to taste the lamb.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. That's a very good analogy.
Well, it does sound like cooking, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Once you know which is your dominant quotient, it's much easier to frame your expectation, your beginning, versus your payoff, the ending. So, let's first talk about those ideas. The milieu is a story that shows the world surrounding the characters create. This is the setting. Characters, the places, the factions, the how your magic system works, how people behave. It's the world around the characters. That's what the menu stands for. The idea is usually concerning the information you intend the reader to uncover or learn as they read your story. This is the information you hold back and how you trickle down.
Your brother is really your father.
Something like that, yeah. Although,
Your wife is really your
it's
husband.
quite interesting that that's the first one you latch on to. Okay,
No,
so
no, it's the old grandpa.
the character concerns the nature of at least one of the characters in your story, but this is the personalities, the development, so on and so forth. And the event story concerns what happens and why it happens, the event going on to it. Yes?
Same question. For the character type,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that there's character development. There's just character exposition.
We'll get to that part. That's actually how we
Okay.
Okay? So let's go first to the menu story. If you want to focus on the setting over everything else, this is what we call a mini story. But how do you identify a mini story compared to everything else? Okay? A mini story focuses on the setting or world. Generally, the story begins with the character leaves a familiar place and enters a new, unfamiliar one, and ends when they again return home. Okay? That's the basic template of a mini story. Okay?
It's like Lord of the Rings.
Lord of we'll go back to that. I would say it's more of an event story, but The Hobbit, I would say, is more of a mini story. A more simple story, I would say, example would be either The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland.
Any travel
Could be, yeah. The Swiss Family Robinson, Treasure Island. These are all mini stories. Although it doesn't necessarily mean setting as in place. It could mean something like I'm drawing a blank right now in the story, but there could be one person who joins a sorority or they enter a new culture. Okay, like they're just stranger in this new culture.
No, Stranger in a Strange Land.
Stranger in a Strange Land. Shogun. If everyone's read that book, that's a good example of a mini story. In these kinds of stories, the star is not the characters. Okay? They're just there to experience the setting. The real star is everything that happens around it. A more contemporary example is the first Harry Potter book. Yes, Harry Potter is important. Yes, Voldemort is a story of a villain, but really, why did you buy the book? You're just here because you want to see what's happening in Hogwarts. You want to see all the wondrous things that happen in Hogwarts. And it's very important to note, remember what I said, a mini story ends when they leave that familiar place. When did Harry Potter end? It did not end when Voldemort was defeated. It did not end when Harry developed his character. When did it end? It ended when he left and returned to the Dursleys. Okay? When did The Hobbit end? Did it end when they defeated Smaug? No. Did it end when they defeated the five armies? No. It ended when Bilbo returned.
Yeah.
Why is it important that we talk about the way we return people back to where they're familiar? Because you want to provide a contrast. Okay? Because you emphasize all these settings, you want to show them, okay, because we have that, we've returned to a place of familiarity, the mini story ends. Yes?
Is there an example of, for example, a mini story wherein the point of view gets terminated before they can return home? I mean, or is it always in that context?
The idea is really, that's actually a very interesting point, but a mini story is often the settings to start. So if your viewpoint character dies before that ends, there may not have been you've lost basically your focal point. Okay, so I would actually advise against that. But that usually when an author does that, it's the cameraman, so to speak, the observer switches to another character. Like I said, the beauty of a mini story is the characters are not important. Or rather, they're not as important as the setting. What's important is traveling through that setting.
The slower field count, like
Sorry?
the slower field, for example, how is a mini story?
It's an event.
I would say it's an event story. We'll get to that. Yeah, yes.
Jurassic Park is kind of a mini story.
Yeah, you're talking about the park.
Yeah, we're talking about the park. The park's important. Although there's an argument that it could be an event story, but yes, there's an argument to be made that it's a mini story. Yes.
Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers. Based on
Yes. Actually, it's a very good one. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So again, why does this matter? If your story focuses so much on a mini story, and then you ended it when they defeated the evil wizard or defeated the big bad guy, there's kind of a disconnect there. So parang, I don't care. I want to see more. I want to see more stories with the. Okay, a good example of how to rein back a good setting and make sure it doesn't take over is what they did in the first Star Wars movie. I'm talking about the New Hope, not
Episode 4.
okay, episode 4. What did they do? They talked about the Jedi. Did they come back to it?
No.
No. It was there, it was lingering. They had fantastic setting. They had Death Stars, they had all these little things. But you know what? It never goes away from what they want. In fact, how do you know that you're not emphasizing too much? In a mini story, okay, the biggest point is the characters are strangers in a strange land. They have no idea what they're dealing with, right? Okay. Alice in Wonderland, for example, has no idea where she is, right? Same with the Wizard of Oz. Harry Potter has no idea what, he's experiencing the setting for the first time, and therefore, the reader, the audience are experiencing these settings for the first time. But let's go to Star Wars, which also has arguably a really good setting, right? But look at how Luke deals with it. It's like an everyday thing for him. Diba? Very scary, like, diba? Or, okay, the Jedi, it's amazing, but I've heard about it before. It's de-emphasized, okay? It's amazing, it's great, but the characters don't treat it as this newfangled thing. It's something that, why? Because they're focused on the event. We'll get to the event story later on and deal with that aspect. Yes?
One last event story. Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles.
Okay. Yeah, actually, that's a good one.
It's just an anthology of different stories tied together loosely around Mars.
Okay. Okay, actually,
That's a good story.
that event story, I don't know what that thing's doing there. But essentially, the main viewpoint characters should be the strangers, as I mentioned, unfamiliar to this new setting. Yes?
So it's always start, then some unfamiliarity, then revert to...
It begins with them in a familiar territory, leaving it for an unfamiliar territory. When I say territory, I don't necessarily mean a place.
Then coming back.
Then coming back. Because it's all about them struggling to understand the experiences of something new.
Okay, so it always
Yes.
comes back. Because would Idiocracy count? Because technically it didn't come back.
Yeah.
Yes, they didn't.
But it throws your characters from your familiar present day setting.
Let's talk about the other stories. So then we can compare it. Part
there's
it really is a mini story.
Kasi they're
Okay? Yes.
the generals together. You can listen.
Okay. But bear in mind, when I say returning to familiarity, it doesn't necessarily mean a place. But they return to a familiar situation. One where they're no longer strangers, no longer... Yes?
Now I'm going to illustrate that point. In the Martian Chronicles, the early part of the story is where mankind begins to
Yeah.
explore Mars.
Mhm.
And the background event there is that Earth is on the verge of a nuclear war. In the course of the story, as you follow the events of the humans on Mars, Earth destroys itself.
Yeah.
And at the end of the story, the remaining survivors of Earth, who are now on Mars, see the reflections in the waters of Mars. And Bradbury ends with the line, "They were the Martians."
Oh yeah, I remember that. But we can actually debate more on that later. But I'd like to say, if you have any examples of particular settings, let's push that first until we get to all four. Because you might be surprised at how maybe your story is not what you think it is.
Okay.
Okay? Because like I said, for example, somebody mentioned Lord of the Rings. In fact, even nowadays, people debate about whether it's an event story or even a mini story, considering that it can be. But I have my own opinions
It
regarding
can be
that.
shared genre, dito, Chip.
Sorry?
It can be shared genre. It can be party menu, party.
It partly actually all the stories have all four. But what is the dominant one? I don't think they can say that it's both dominant this now. There's always one that's dominant.
There can only one.
And if it is both, then I would say you're not preparing the story very well.
Okay.
Okay? Alright, so then we go to the character story. Now you'll notice I skipped I.
Yeah.
Okay, the reason why I skipped I is because a lot of people confuse event and idea very much. So I like to put those two together. So I go to character story because generally character story is very self-explanatory. When a character story concerns the nature of at least one of the characters in your story. Well, that's pretty obvious. Again, if you're talking about beginning, the expectations versus the ending, the payoff. Begins with the character dissatisfied with their role in the society and sets about changing it. Again, that's very important. If they have to start the story dissatisfied about something, okay? Ends when she or she either finds a new role, is content to return to their old role, or despairs. The third was very rare. That's usually a tragedy at that point. But very important how do you explain the character story. Character stories start with them dissatisfied and about them trying to change their way because they don't know their current status in life. Now, This is very important because when people say character stories, they often say, oh, it focuses on this character, it must be a character story. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the case. Okay? So, for example, I gave 2 examples. Clueless, if you remember that old Alicia Silverstone movie, or The Pursuit of Happiness. Okay? Yes, there's an event, there's a problem that needs to be solved, but essentially it's all about how this person changes, right? A good way to know if a TV show or a story is a character event is, let's see how I say this very flippantly, but if the movie director or the TV show director focuses so much time on the face of the guy and whether he's crying or dealing, it generally tries to tell the character. Why? In a character story, the event, what's happening, the plot, takes a back seat. What matters is how the character feels at that certain point. This is what they mean when they say it's a character piece with no plot. In general, in a character story, the story is how the character is reacting. Everything else that happens in the background becomes slightly irrelevant to the story. Okay? So, in other words, it's about the transformation the characters go in the communities that matter most to him. Okay? It's not about what he does. It's about who he is, so we can better understand the decisions they made along the way. Now, in an event story, we're trying to stop the bad guy, or save the princess, or stop the global event from happening. It's about what he does. It's about how his actions save the world. In a character story, it's not about that. It's about the decisions he made and how he got there. Okay? Another example of this is Breaking Bad. Is it okay if I talk about this? Alright? Okay, in Breaking Bad, yes, it's about how he affects his family. There's a story about will he get away? But really, that's not what the story is about. What is it about? His transformation from an innocent professor to an evil drug lord. Okay? Really, we don't care about what else happens outside of that. We just want to see how he got to that point.
It's a love story.
Yes.
I'm beginning to see parallels between the character story and Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Is there a parallel, or am I just...
Yeah, actually, it's funny you mentioned Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, which we're talking about, but I would say not as much as you think.
Okay.
Because the Hero's Journey is more like a template for medieval fantasy type
Hmm.
characters. But character stories is really more on how the transformation happens. I'll give an example of stories that look like they're character stories, but they're not because they don't transform. The biggest example is really James Bond.
Oh, yeah, well.
Okay, why?
Except 2 of that.
Actually, except if you talk about the Daniel Craig era, because they tried to shift it away from that. But effectively, let's analyze James Bond. Yes, there's a character. His name is on the title of the stories. But let's face it, he starts the story a certain way. He ends it, he's exactly the same person. He hasn't changed. He hasn't transformed. He wasn't dissatisfied. He's happy about his life, but guess what? He's at the exact same point at the end of the movie. Yes?
What about the Godfather trilogy? Michael Corleone's transformation from...
That's a character. I would say it's a character story because it becomes irrelevant what happens in the in the mobster. It's really about Michael Corleone's transformation from someone who did not want to enter the family business to someone who accepted rules and accepts it, right?
Okay, so Kingsman?
Sorry,
Kingsman.
I haven't watched that movie, so I would.
Can you spoil it?
But I would.
Kingsman.
Could be. Okay, but essentially, the very important part is in the character story, it's about the transformation. If the character did not change, it's not a character story. If he wasn't dissatisfied with his life at the beginning, it's not a character story. So, what does that mean? If you end your story with your character happy, and then he becomes the king of the land after beating the dragon, that's not a character story because he did not. It's all about his decisions on the way. Okay, we'll talk more about like I said, we're talking about literature first. We'll talk about the RPG elements later. Okay, so we go to the event story. Again, I'm avoiding the idea first. In an event story, because that's what happens and why it happens. But here's the problem thing. Isn't every story an event? Yes, like I said, all stories have all 4 elements. But although events happen in every story, the world in an event story is unbalanced in some way. It is out of order. An event story is about the struggle to reestablish the old order or to create a new one. Okay? In other words, in an event story, the world is in chaos somewhere. Okay? It begins with the main character trying to restore order, ends when they succeed in reestablishing old order, or begin a new one. More rarely, it ends with them failing. But, you know, yes.
Oedipus Rex.
Yes, could be one. So essentially, what does that map? Because in an event story, the world is in chaos. They're trying to change it. Okay. Now it doesn't have to be just necessarily the world saying anything like. Okay, a big example. This is Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. Okay, the world is in chaos. It's all about how the characters try to bring back order. Alright, it doesn't have to be that big. It could be about high school and how the perfect girl is so satisfied with her life, and suddenly this guy who's a rebel comes in and disrupts her perfect world, and now it's about her trying to get established. Basically, a love story rom-com.
That's Greece.
Yes. Because it's the same thing. It's about how the world was the world, in this case, the small town and the lives they had, is suddenly disrupted by this element coming in, bringing chaos. Yes.
Romeo and Juliet are the same.
Actually,
For Romeo, he was unhappy with Rosalind. Juliet was unhappy.
I would argue it's not a character story because they don't really change. Yeah, you're right. It's an event story. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
So
they die.
once again, it begins with the main character trying to restore order. Right? Okay. So Star Wars is a very good example of that. Okay, the characters are trying to restore
What
order.
about just the opposite? So the world is not in chaos and the characters
Change it.
change the world.
It's still the same because according to the viewpoint of the characters, it is in chaos because it's not their philosophy that's
They're not
ruling.
happy.
They're not happy. Right? It's in chaos in their eyes.
It's
Okay.
an established order, not
The established order that has to be
Not
changed.
an order per se.
Even
Yes.
if they don't-
So you mean like most of the dystopian novels that are out right now? So that like more.
Yes, because the world is in chaos. The characters are trying to bring back order in that regards. Okay? Yes.
The escape movies, Sneak Peek Escape.
Escape from New York.
Escape from
In
New
a
York.
way, but I would say that yes, actually yes, I would say they are. Even in this small part, hey,
It's not a character.
it's not a character, definitely.
Isn't that more like
Although it might be an idea story. I'm not specifically. We'll go to the idea
It's
story.
more of a military story since Snake gets put into an island full of convicts.
What's the focus about him trying to change the? How do you know it's different between a mini story and event story? It's a good point. If the story is about him just experiencing the setting, it's a mini story. If it's about him trying to change the setting, because it has to be changed, then it's an event story.
Then the guy just has to escape. Literally.
Then what do you think?
That's a change. That's a change.
No, he's not escaping per se. He gets sent there to do something.
And then escape
escapes,
from.
and then he changes the order at the end.
Well, but what's the focus? What did the director want you to get? In the end, what is he trying to change? If he's just simply trying to get him out of it, it's mini story. If he's wanting to change the world, okay? Because I would argue it's not really an event in that regard because the setting still survives. The order still survives. Now, like I said, let's focus all the story after we get all four. Okay? So
Idea story.
the idea story now concerns the information you intend to read it and cover or learn as a video story, as I mentioned. Let's talk about the beginning. The story begins when your main character meets an obstacle. They have a problem that must be solved. This gives rise to a question: how will they get around that obstacle? The story ends when the characters answer the question and remove the obstacle. So let me go ahead. Your question about escape from New York. Does it fall under that? What's the obstacle that he has? Okay, now, at this point, because you have to understand the difference between the three of them. In the middle story, it's about experiencing the setting. In an event story, it's about changing the order. In an idea story, it's simply about answering a question. Can he do it? Okay.
Maybe the first one is an idea story and the second one is a
Yeah.
event story.
Because it's not really about trying to change the system. It's more about, okay, can he survive? Diba? Because you would have information from the audience. They don't know. Yes.
Okay, I'm a bit confused now because when you're describing that, I keep on getting flashes of Blade Runner.
Okay, but what's the question? What was the focus? What was the ending of Blade Runner?
That has me confused because throughout the story, your point of view character, Deckard, doesn't seem to change.
Yeah.
And then you get a reveal
Mm-hmm.
that's implying that he's actually a replica.
Uh-huh.
And when that reveal comes out, you look back at the story, everything changes in retrospect by
Yeah.
that single reveal.
But then we have to look at the Blade Runner. It has a lot of tropes from the detective noir idea.
And then that brings
Actually, we'll talk about nesting different multiple stories
Okay,
later
that's
on.
probably the reason why.
Okay, but essentially, let's talk about the lean idea. Okay, so in an idea story, this is essentially how you understand if it's an idea story or not. It's about the process of finding information. The solution revealed being the ending. It's, in other words, it's not about beating whatever. It's about the dissemination of information. A big difference, let's say the difference about. Okay, when people think idea story, they generally think detective stories, right? But here's how. Let's look at the difference between two seemingly similar ideas. Let's talk about serial Alex Cross films, particularly David Fincher films, like the one that starred Morgan Freeman, the very first one, Kiss the Girls, I think. Okay, now it's about a detective, right? Trying to stop a serial killer. Compare that to Sherlock Holmes, which is about a detective trying to stop a murder, right? Murder. But what is the difference between the two of them? In a David Fincher film, or usually also the Alex Cross, when does it end? It ends when he finally defeats, kills, captures the serial killer. It becomes an event story because it's all about trying to stop a murderer who broke the established order of the small town. Versus the Sherlock Holmes films, the Sherlock Holmes books, or CSI, which follows the TV show, it does not end or when the murderer is captured. When does it end? It ends when they explain to the audience how they did it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In fact, if you look at Sherlock Holmes stories, he doesn't do the capturing at all.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of Lestrade. He does the capturing. He does all the action. Because it doesn't. The writer doesn't care, or the doesn't care about how he does it. What he cares about is giving the audience, that's how he did it. That's an idea story. Why? It's about information release. It's about how did Sherlock Holmes do it versus does he succeed in capturing, or does he succeed in establishing order? Order in this case being back to being a crimeless setting. Yes.
A lot of the episodes from the current Doctor Who series seem to fall under that
Which one? Event or
idea.
idea?
I'll
Yeah.
give you a concrete example: the space whale.
Mm-hmm.
And in this show, the Doctor and his companion ended up in space, and apparently the civilization they're on
Exactly.
is on a massive space whale.
Yeah.
All right, and there's a mystery going on, and the episode ends with what is the mystery answers the question: what is the real relationship between the whale
Yeah.
and the kingdom?
Exactly. So as writers or as authors of the story, you have to ask them, what's more important to you? That they stop the enemy or answering a question? Then you have a better idea of how to frame your story. Because if it's an idea story, then it's really about them trying to find out the truth. Rather than, I found out the truth and it's about aliens living among us. We have to stop them. Okay? We'll get back to that, a very interesting point, and how not to use and how to use information, because you're delving. If you want to create an event story, you're delving too much in information, and we're going to idea territory, specifically for RPGs. Yes.
Well, it depends on the story, because for example, I'm thinking about A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
It depends on the character, what kind of story.
Exactly.
So
Although,
if they will give them, for example, Ned Stark,
yeah,
it's about knowing something.
yeah, exactly.
But their kids is about surviving.
It's about nesting. Although,
Tyrion Lannister is about how he changes. So it's not like all in every kind of story. In that story.
that's a good example of nesting stories within each other. We'll get to that in a bit. Although, I would like to point out, I'd like to avoid talk about Game of Thrones simply because he's not finished. Okay, I don't know yet what he. I don't want to comment because he hasn't finished the story. Once he's finished the story, then we can delve deeper on what he really wanted or not. But since he hasn't finished yet, I want to give him a benefit of the doubt first regarding that. Yes.
The one thing that I like about idea story is It's how they make me look back
Yeah.
at the story and it changes my it changes
Exactly.
my
Because it's not about the ending, it's about the process.
Is
of how you
that,
got there.
is that the main effect of the idea story? That
Not-
when you get the big reveal,
Yeah.
for example, The Prestige,
Uh-huh.
the movie The Prestige, the reveal at the end changes how you look at everything.
Yeah, actually, what happens, what we have there is what is becoming an unconscious critiquing of the story. Like, okay, this is the reveal, I go back, did the author do a good job
Yeah.
in releasing it? Because if he didn't, then it's a bad idea story.
That's the reason why I don't mind spoilers.
Yeah, essentially, right? Okay, now, let's, basically, we're going to talk more deeper about it, but essentially, here's a summary of what characters are on each story, the main characters. In a new story, your characters are adventurers, explorers, strangers. Because it's all about them going through things that they're not familiar with. In an idea story, they're investigators or researchers. They're trying to find out. In character stories, I wrote in quotation, they're irrelevant what they are. Because it's about them inside, what they feel. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what kind of character they are. In event stories, they're influencers. What do I mean? They're the ones most capable of influencing, of changing the setting. The ones who can do something about it.
The heroes.
Yeah.
The heroes, yes, or the villains, depending on, or the anti-heroes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about next. You guys have mentioned a lot about, oh, in this story, there's a lot of stories inside it. How do you do that? That's what the concept called nesting mice quotient, or nesting a story within another. It's a mini story, but inside the mini story is a character story, or it's an event story, but inside it's a mini story or a character. It's about nesting it. Now you have to remember in one thing: the more developed each factor is, the longer the story becomes. Okay, because this is why I always advocate, right? Especially in the beginning for one shots in RPGs, you try to be as lean as possible. Because the more developed you are, the more you put in more powerful, emotional, effective stories, the longer it gets. Short stories usually have just one story. Wizard of Oz has one, it's a mini story. Okay? While novels can have as much as 4 or more. Okay? And then this is why George R. R. Martin is taking so damn long. Because he has a lot of good ideas that he crammed into one story. It's all nested in it. Now, TV shows have an advantage. They can add all these rich ideas because effectively they have so much time to develop it. If you only have as much time, if you are, for example, writing a very long campaign, you can add so much. If you only have a one shot, I would suggest you only focus on just one. Yes.
Star Trek, 50 years and counting.
Exactly. With that. Okay. So essentially, you can probably structure subplots and factors by nesting them into the main story. Okay. And it's important to keep focus on the main factor and outline the structure of the story. So this is where I'll delve into Star Wars, because I will use this this is the perfect example of how you nest effectively. I will just focus on the original trilogy, 4, 5, 6. Okay, just to simplify things. Although we can have and honestly, if you talk about the whole thing, it's going to take us forever to talk about it. Okay, what do you think it is? I'm talking about the original trilogy, the whole thing. What is it?
Central Campbell's.
What kind of story is it? What do you think? Of the 4 types we mentioned, what is the Star Wars trilogy? 4 to 6.
I think it's an event story.
It's an event story. Why? The world's in chaos. The Empire's there. It's all about the rebels trying to restore order. But within that, we have the story of a farm boy growing up to become a Jedi Knight. There's a story about the father finding redemption. It's a story about 2 wildly different characters falling in love. Okay, it's also about the setting of the world. The story about the Jedi Knights and how they fell. It's a story of these little things that come into play. Yes.
Actually, I always refer to the Star Wars saga as the rise, fall, and redemption of Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, exactly. But we're talking about framing.
Yeah.
How it framed in the story. Now, here's the very important thing, and this is where we delved into a little bit of RPG tips on your story. One of the things that the trilogy did is how they ended each movie. Okay, the whole thing is one big story, an event story, but each of the 3 movies is different. The first movie, New Hope, is an event story.
Yes.
It's about destroying or how to destroy the Death Star, and how they restore order, because this thing was destroying was going to disrupt the balance, or rather the close imbalance between the Rebel Alliance and Empire. The second story, think about it, didn't really progress the story. You know, it began with the rebels being the underdogs. It ended with them pretty much in the same way. I would argue that Empire Strikes Back is a character story, because everything, including the main event story, took a pause to delve in how Luke Skywalker matured and how Leia and Hans matured. Okay, because let's face it. What did we say about character stories? It's about what? Characters being dissatisfied with their lot in life and about them accepting, right? Now, it was nested in it because it was briefly mentioned in episode 1, or rather, episode 4, sorry, that he was dissatisfied. What was he? He was a hot-headed guy who didn't like how the world was unjust.
He was whiny.
He was whiny, and he saw things, we gotta stop them. He was very whiny. What happened by the end of Empire Strikes Back? When he returns in Return of the Jedi, he's Zen-like, he's mature, he's calm.
He has one arm.
But the point is, the entire point of Empire Strikes Back is about how he changed from a hot-headed young guy to a guy who accepted his fate. Right?
Accident will do that to you.
Diba? Yes. And we have two characters who are dissatisfied with how Han and Leia being dissatisfied how the other person is talking to them, and then it's all about them falling in love. Okay? So I would argue that Empire Strikes Back is a character story. Because now, the Empire, the fight between the Rebels and the Empire is irrelevant to that particular movie. Right? Then we move into the third movie, Return of the Jedi. It is not an event story. It's actually, I would say, for me, it's an idea story. Why? What was the idea that ate up the mind of Luke Skywalker?
Ewoks.
I'm supposed to give later on, but this is very important. I think it's the best I mentioned this. If you're a DM, one of the things that really annoys me as an older DM is when people end their stories in video game cliffhangers. I'm sorry, Mario, the princess in our castle. Why? Nothing has been solved. I would rather, when your session has to end, it ends rather in a resolution, an ending. You nested several stories, you resolve a nested one before you move on to the next. Look how they ended each one. It was not a cliffhanger. I mean, there were answers questions, you can continue the story. If you imagine the original Star Wars as a party of that you're running, you get to see really how well the DM in this case ended each session properly. With a payoff. Here's the thing. If you end your story in a cliffhanger, what essentially are you doing to your players? Oh, sorry, the payoff is next week. Or 2 weeks from now. Or actually, let's face it, in today's day and age, your next session is what? 3 weeks later? Okay, or even longer. That's too long for someone to wait for a payoff. You give your players a payoff now by ending once. You don't have to end your entire campaign. But if you can end your session in a payoff, that's the way the trilogy did it. Okay? So, like Empire Strikes Back, the story didn't end. You have enough material for your next session. But you ended the story of Han and Leia and Luke Skywalker's change in story. Yes?
Would it be appropriate for me to mention the mechanic used in Dungeon World for this? Because it sounds like it's appropriate.
I think that should be something we talk about after the talk. Kasi I have a lot to cover, and we're talking more about how it is good. Okay, so any questions about nesting? Alright? So let's go to each story construction tips for RPGs. Now, that's all just bear in mind, I never talked about RPGs, just simply about stories. Now let's go to the RPG aspect. How can you use that for your games that you're running? Okay, so let's talk about mini stories, and this is where I want to really focus on. Most common story type for beginner game masters, often not on purpose. Okay, this is the #1 most common story type for RPGs. I would even say it's as high as 75% of all stories being run are mini stories. Why? Because the very nature of an RPG is a mini. Think about it. A setting, Forgotten Realms, amazing. Numenera, amazing. But, there's so much on the races, the mind flayers, the elves, the dwarves, the drow. That setting. You go with it. Magic. How does magic work in your world? How does the politics work? How did the gods come to be? That's all setting. Okay, so most people first read their first RPG book and see how amazing the world is, they focus it on the mini story. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would argue that's the most common thing you're going to deal with. But more than that, one of the problems I have with a mini story, I should stop using the word problem because it's not a problem, but one of the concerns I have with a mini story is that when people say, I have this amazing story about how they stop this evil overlord, but they're all going off bent, the reason for that is we're all preconditioned already for a mini story.
Yeah.
Right? It's something that is engraved on. We don't care about the story, the event. We care about the loot we're gonna get after we defeat the overlord. We don't care about the characters falling in love. We don't care about it because we want to level up. Why? Because not just because we level up, we get loot. Leveling up means we now have access to more content. We can now fight dragons. We can now see more of the setting. And that is something that's hardwired in all RPGs. So, I would argue, as a dungeon master, your biggest challenge is how to wean yourself out, and your players, wean out from a mini story. Because that's really, if you want a more varied story point, well, your challenge is how to get out of that mindset. Okay? So, as I said, it's best for players just starting out, not familiar with the game setting. Why? Remember what I said, it's all about being unfamiliar. They have no idea what a drow is, supposedly. They have no idea what a mind is. So, oh no, when the mind player mind controls them, it's a new challenge, it's a problem, right? Okay? You have to strive for unfamiliarity and wonder in a mini story. So that's why you keep throwing things in and out. The other thing to note in a mini story is that your players will tend to generalize rather than specialize. Since they have no idea what they're going to experience next, they will generalize their stats. They won't focus on things, specialized spells, because to them, they have to be prepared for anything. Okay? So you gotta get these are the things that will come into mind. Okay? So as I said, in a mini story, players should be strange to the setting. If they are, it might be better to frame it as a different type of story. Okay? If your players already know what the drow is because they're veterans, maybe you may not want to. We'll delve more into those types of things. Idea stories, on the other hand, are the default type for investigative stories. In these kinds of things, information should be revealed slowly, and intuition should be rewarded. And the proper use of surprises becomes important. Now, in idea stories, okay, it becomes interesting to note because in idea stories, it's all about a question. Okay? So, in idea stories, what is important is how to answer a question, right? Now, remember what they said about mini stories tends to take over, right? One of the advice I have normally for idea stories, if you want an idea story about them investigating, and in fact this goes for all kinds of stories, to start de-emphasizing the setting. Okay? What? Look at the most common code for information stories, idea stories. The detective noir stories. What is that, in my opinion, shows the best use of milieu in an idea story. What? You have an amazing setting. Okay, usually it's what? It's crime-ridden LA. What? With dark corners. Every woman you meet is a femme fatale. Every cop is corrupt. Right? It's always a bar with a Negro bell, receptionist or door boy. It's an amazing setting, amazing milieu. But nobody gives a shit about that. Or rather, they do, but it helps with the setting. What's important is the hard-nosed PI doing his job. Okay? What matters here? Let's go back to what a mini story is. It's about entering an unfamiliar setting. But the milieu of a detective noir story is not unfamiliar. Yes, it's beautiful. They can see a new bar, they can enter a new warehouse that they've never been to before. But guess what? It's always going to be dank. It's always going to be dark. There's always going to be steam rising from the sewers. There's always going to be corrupt cops. You can expect. It's not unfamiliar. You know exactly what to expect. Okay? So if you want to frame your idea story, everything has to be familiar. If there's a dragon in your idea story, your players have to go, eh. Well, that's exactly an exaggeration, but it's supposed to be, okay, dragons, alright guys, you know the drill, draw your sword, let's fight it. It's not an amazing thing to meet a dragon. Okay? Because in your story, it's an unfamiliar. So, one of the advice I usually give for GMs when they write idea stories okay, is to, we'll get to that, but basically, you want to de-emphasize new things, okay? This is where MOOCs become very valuable, okay?
Yeah.
You know, the ordinary human thug to fight. There's not, one thing is when you write an idea story and you want an amazing arch nemesis, like a mind flayer or vampire, sorcerer, yes, but don't give him fantastical henchmen like a beholder, a mind flayer's henchman, because now it's a mini story. You're throwing so many different settings, and you know, how did this vampire meet, you know, befriend the beholder? How kind of magic they got in? But you have this vampire, sorcerer. Wow, very very powerful. But he sends to you ordinary thugs. It's a form, okay. Yes, this vampire sorcerer is unfamiliar, but I know the price. That's what I have to go after. I know I have to. That's why I have to research. I'm not going to be caught by surprise by anything else in the story. At least not from a setting. Okay, because you know what? That dungeon over there, I know it's going to be dark. I know there's going to be a corrupt cop there. You know, it's something that to know in the high idea. Yes.
So the menu story, no, the idea story.
It focuses on the question. Yeah.
Yeah, and it funnels you to the question because all the others are tropes.
Yeah.
These are the things that you know. These are the things that are reliable.
Yes.
And the things that point you to the answer to your question stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, exactly. So it helps out in that regard. Okay, so I would say the more you don't want to be a mini story, the more you have to be more focused on what you're using. Okay. So, now, character stories is probably the most difficult type of story to incorporate into an RPG, simply because you're not in control of character.
Yeah.
Okay? There are two ways to do it. The witness method and the deep character piece method. In the witness method, the players are not the main influence in the story, but witnesses to the transformation of an NPC. Okay? That means there's one NPC character. This person is the one who will save the world. And the characters are the ones who are helping. A big example of this as a story, Mad Max Fury Road.
Yes.
Okay? Bear in mind, the trap of a witness method is, oh, I'm not even important to the story. Why would I care about the story? But in Mad Max Fury Road, right? He does care. They are responsible for making sure the main character, quote unquote, survives. That they can fulfill their. So now you can put all your energies in the development of this NPC, and the characters will influence this character, like their actions. Okay. If you played the video game Dishonored, has anyone played the stealth game?
Yeah.
Okay. The character of Elena Caldwell, it's not the main character, but essentially your actions there can influence whether she grows up to be a tyrant or a benevolent hero. Empress. So you can make changes. And the nice thing about it, like I said, in a character story, when the person transforms, the player characters are involved in that transformation. Okay. And you don't have to deal with pesky people trolling. But the other one, and this is the biggest challenge of all, if you can do this, kudos to you, is the deep character piece that focuses on the player's transformation via challenges. Now, here's the thing about that. It's not as difficult as it sounds. Remember, in a character story, it's all about the transformation of the character. This is where you can just simply throw it to them and see how they react. It's okay. Because like I said about Breaking Bad, it's irrelevant already what the story is. It just changed. So, for example, they start trolling you and start killing off your NPCs. Fine. You go with that. You see his transformation from a hero to a villain. That's your story right there. You go with it. Okay? So here's something very interesting, how the advice I have for that. And this is where actually going to be controversial. Do not reward good decisions with mechanical prizes. XP, magic items. What do I mean by good decisions? Good things like, okay. Do the opposite, in fact. What do I mean by good decisions? Remember how the problem with morality systems, and again, we've been hardwired with video games. We have a lot of video games morality systems, right? But how are you rewarded? You do this, you get weapons or a level up, or you get the favor of this faction, or you can choose the other faction. So it becomes very mechanical. But more than that, you will notice that they often reward you to do the right thing. But if there is the sword dangling in front of you that you have weapons in the line or leveling up on the line, they're not going to take the bait. Of course they'll take the good one. Because they want to level up, they want weapons, they want new spells. But it becomes a lot harder when you not only not reward people for acting good, you actually reward them for acting bad. Okay?
I would say in character.
In character, right? Now, the thing,
That's selfish.
let's look at it from the real world. If you cheat in an exam, what happens to you? And let's assume you're not caught. You get high grades, you get into the college you want, you get all the benefits of it. If you can imagine college degrees as levels, you just leveled up. But what if you didn't cheat, and therefore you have to suffer the consequences of failing? Isn't that a character development? Because you made a choice, and you suffer for it. Okay? So a good way to input a character story with players is that roundabout way. You reward people for being immoral, and you don't reward them for morality. But then, that's the challenge you're going to give them. You give them clearly a good choice, doesn't get them the rewards that they normally expect, while a bad choice, actually, wait, you're giving me that weapon if I do this. What if I don't? Well, then let's see. Okay? So in other words, you de-emphasize the accomplishments because now the story is about how he made the decision to either take the easy way out or did not. But it doesn't become important unless the rewards are not clear. Because if he takes it, the good choice is the reward, then it's not a character story. Yes?
The old world Dungeons is set up like that.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons usually does not actually have a setting like that.
Yeah.
Where one of the layers of health, the ones ruled by Pazuzu,
Yeah.
everything you did will be twisted such that you have a moral dilemma.
Exactly. Yeah. So you just emphasize the accomplishments and focus on what changes it does to the character. Now, I mentioned one scene that I really like in Christopher Nolan's Batman is the scene, and this could be a good way for you to deal with interactions with players. Remember the scene when he creates this whole network that uses the cell phones of people to spy on it, and then when Lucius Fox says, this is wrong, right? And what does he tell Batman at that point? He says, okay, I'll do what you ask, but I will resign afterwards. I'll take no part in this. That is a character development because here's the thing. He gets all the benefits. He stops the enemy with this powerful spell or this powerful card effects. But it's at the cost of Lucius Fox, which, let's face it, in an RPG terms doesn't really matter. But now he has a choice to make. Do I continue with this but I lose my best friend? Now, in the process, which by the way will not have a mechanical effect, but it will have a story effect. Okay?
Okay.
Yes.
Isn't that like similar to how players sometimes trade, whenever they can just favors,
Mm-hmm.
and then they just burn it to be able to do an event or succeed in an action?
Exactly. But because now you're not putting a benefit to one or the other, now the choice becomes what matters. Because now, moral choices are no longer tied to rewards. They're not tied to, what I want my character to be. I imagine my character to be a paladin who does good things. But now, because the problem with video games is that they reward you with actual benefits. Yes. What? Yes.
Which kind of reminds me of Jane Onion and Feb.
I've never played it, so I wouldn't know. Yes.
I understand. When you say reward good decisions, you're talking about mechanical rewards.
Mechanical. I don't mean story rewards. I'm talking about rewards as in items, spells, experience points. That's what I mean by mechanical rewards.
So there are always, so if you present your characters with dilemmas.
Yeah. With a clear understanding that if they're not going to get a reward if they do it, but it's the right thing to
A
do.
mechanical reward, yeah.
Yeah.
And anything they choose, and any option that they create, always has a consequence.
Consequence. And often, yes.
When you say good decisions, you mean decisions that are expected for those characters? Because, for example, you were talking about the Dark Knight.
Yeah.
And the scene when there are two ships, one with bad people, another one with good citizens, and they have the choice to kill each other, and they don't.
Yes.
the good thing is not expected for the
Yeah.
the bad guys.
Mm.
So is that a good decision? Is a bad decision because they don't have reward for it?
No,
Basically, Stingy, when you talk about alignment systems, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I like this definition of a good alignment. For those who are still struggling, what is considered lawful evil? Well, yes, yes. A good decision is defined as something that will benefit others but inconvenience you. Because if it gives you a benefit, it doesn't necessarily is good. It could just mean you're selfish. Like put it, when a corrupt politician donates millions of dollars, is it a good act? Because he knows it will means more votes for him. Is it considered a good act or selfish act? Okay, but if a person donates all his money just because it's the right thing to do, but there's no clear benefit, then it's a good act. Same thing when it comes to character. Because character development is all about your decision or how it affects you, right?
Yeah.
But, so you can subvert that again. So what they say, one thing, let's try to get out of the feeling that, okay, they act good, let's reward them with experience points. Don't do that. In fact, make it clear that they're not going to give them that. They have, why? Because you're now training your players to be satisfied with story.
Narrative.
Now, you know what? I did not level up, but I did the right thing. I feel so great.
Actually, Jay, funny thing you should actually mention that because
Yeah.
there is a trend toward discarding the XP mechanic,
Yes.
and I think that is at the heart of it,
Yeah.
where it is more satisfying to present your characters with dilemmas.
Yes, dilemmas.
And give them enough power not only to accept the choices you present to them,
Yeah.
but to craft their own options.
Yeah. But it's more, but yes, and what I'm trying to say is, especially, is to wean people out of the idea that I'm doing this to level up.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm doing this because it's the right thing. Because if you're doing it to level up, then it's still a video game.
Yeah.
It's still tied to a particular min-maxing behavior. Diba?
Yeah.
So you have to condition them to say, okay, we're doing this because we have to, not because it means I'm going to level up. Alright? So, and then now you're given a difficult choice. Because I want to level up. I want to be more powerful to beat the main villain. But if I do this, I won't get that.
Or it'll take you longer.
It'll take you longer. But here's the thing, what if they do that? They still do it. Great, you have a story. Now you have a Breaking Bad story. You have a story about how they compromised, how they corrupt, and that's still a beautiful story. Because now everyone's judging, the NPCs start judging your player characters, but you're still rewarding them. That's the amazing thing, you're still rewarding them. They're becoming more and more powerful, and everybody's still looking at them and you've changed. That's it. But the thing is,
classic power corrupts absolutely.
so that's one aspect of it. Another aspect I want to mention is, you mentioned the hero's journey. Now the problem I had with John, if you guys don't know what Eric's mentioning, it's a very, very interesting piece on how to write a good fantasy story. It's called The Hero's Journey, which shows all the tropes, all the steps you need to take to make a good story. It's called John Campbell's The Hero's Journey. I found, for me, the same simplified. That's Dan Harmon's story circle. If you're not familiar with Dan Harmon, he's the showrunner and writer of Community and Rick and Morty. Okay, he came up with a what they call a story circle. All stories they say, particular character follows this story circle, and it's a very interesting one. I would say it's a simpler one and a lot less complicated. So if you for an RPG, I would say John Campbell's a little too complicated. It'll take you too many sessions to do all these steps.
Yeah.
But if you don't have time in your net, the story circle, which I'm going to show right now, is better. So this is Dan Harmon's story circle. And you can say all stories will follow these steps before going back to the beginning. Alright, what is that? First, a character is in a zone of comfort. Number two, so you show something, they're comfortable. Number two, they want something. They're dissatisfied. Right? The character story out. Number three, number three rather. They enter an unfamiliar story situation because that's where they get what they need to do to get what they want. They want something. They want something that will meet their satisfaction. Because they're dissatisfied, they want something, so they go somewhere unfamiliar because that's where the source of their reward, what they need, can be found. But the problem is it's an unfamiliar setting. So what do? They adapt to it. They fight through the system. The struggle comes in. Number five, they get what they wanted. But here's very important. This is where the character development comes in. They pay a heavy price to get it. Then they're in a familiar situation, but now they're changed because of the price they had to pay. to get to where. Okay, so let's go back to Star Wars, my favorite example. Look at the journey of Luke Skywalker. What he is in the zone of comfort. He's with the rebels. He got what he wants, right? He's with the rebels. He's fighting the good fight. But he wants something. What does he want? He not yet. What he wants is the power to do more. He doesn't feel like he needs it because. So he enters a familiar situation. What happens? Obi-Wan comes in and tells him about where to go to become a Jedi. So he enters a familiar Dagobah. He adapts to the trainings of Yoda, gets what he wants it. But he pays a heavy price for it. He doesn't complete it. Why? Because what's the price he had to pay for it? Not just that, but from an emotional standpoint, he had to learn some things about himself, about the dark side, about the struggle. So and he pays a heavy price. So he returns to the familiar situation, and realizing and he's changed because of it. It's your typical story. So I would say this is a simpler than John Campbell's Hero's Journey. But I would still encourage you to research that. The Hero's Journey. It's a very interesting one. But I would say that's more applicable for novels. For a game story, maybe it might be too complicated. This might be a simpler way of framing. So these 8 can be encounters right there into your story on how to frame it. This is enough for a one-shot. Okay, questions? None? Okay, let's go to the event story. This is more common type of story for experienced game masters. When you got to so many sessions, they start going to event stories. In fact, many published materials are event stories. It's all about defeating Strahd or villain or finding God. Okay, one of the things you do in an event story, and we talked about it, right? How is to minimize investigation by character. And this is an advice I would give for start. If you have an event story and you want them to focus on defeating or bring back order, you want to minimize encounters where it's all about investigating. Why? Because it detracts from why? Because it's a slowdown of the build-up. Your build-up is them defeating them. But so I'll give an example of in briefing room scenes become useful to relay information. Okay? I'll give an example of very lean, again going back to episode 4, is a perfect example of an event story where let's think about it. Did they do any sort of investigating or research? No.
A lot of Bothans died to get us in.
But that's a different story altogether. But look at that story. Everything was hand-fed to them. First hand-feeding scene. R2-D2, help me watch Obi-Wan, you're my only hope. He knows what he needs to do. Second thing he needs to do. Okay, I'm Luke Skywalker, player. I need to get out of the planet. Mos Eisley. This is how much comes back. You'll never find more. Somebody else just told him what to do. Alright? How do I get out? Go through how do I get through the stormtroopers? Han just told him what to do. Okay? They get into the Death Star. How do they find out about Leia? Guess what? They told them about it. So on and so forth. And how do they defeat the Death Star? Guess what? There was a briefing room that told them about the targeting area. It's 2 meters wide. Everything was hand-fed. Why? Because those things would detract if they had given. If this was an idea story about her, oh no, how will the rebels stop the Death Star? Then it would be framed differently. It will now be a story of
The Bothans.
no. Let's imagine that kind of story if it was framed as an idea story. If that was the case, then they'll be doing spot checks or search checks to find that 2 centimeters wide hole. Okay. Oh no, our plan's not working. We gotta do something. Okay, guys, let's look around. We gotta find a weakness in the Death Star. It's an exciting way to look at it. But that was not the story they went with. But you can see how these things are framed in a different way. So, briefing room scenes become very important, useful tool if you don't want them to waste time. Give them all the information because someone else is giving it to them. Conversely, if you want an idea story, you want to minimize these things. Let them find things on their own. Okay, a story should begin as close as possible to the moment when characters can affect the story. So you want them to come in at that time. Characters tend to be most prepared, specialized in these cases. Since all the information is being given to them,
They know how to prepare.
they have the prepared. They can do the specialized spells in that aspect. Okay. Alright, investigation. Note the ratio. Okay, let's not talk about the 4. Let's talk about in general tips. You go. Note the ratio of inconsequential encounters and side quests for the different types of stories. Okay, so like I said, remove the things that are not necessary for the point. Information gathering stories are not important for event stories because They will detract from the emotional build-up. Okay? I already mentioned this. Consider ending each session by resolving a nested story rather than cliffhangers. Because you want to give a payoff. You want them to come back the next time. So you have to resolve a very big payoff. Okay. I like this one. If you're not writing a mini story, the monster manual is not your friend. Why? The more you use that, the more you use all those fluff books, all those forgotten supplement books, the more you are emphasizing the mini story, which by the way, could be an amazing mini story. But if that's not what you want to focus on, it's just going to excite people more. Oh my God, I want to know more about let's say you have a story about politics in a city and how they made an arrangement with the drow. And oh my God, the drow is so amazing, let's go to the Underdark. And she didn't prepare for them to go to the Underdark because she wanted them to focus on that. Okay, but she just showed them what the drow are. So they want to go to the Underdark now, okay? So be it. Let's go to the Underdark. I wasn't prepared for it, but hey. Okay? So you try to pull that back. Okay? Ideally, especially if you're starting out, have one monster, either because it's the pet of the main enemy or the enemy itself, and have everyone else be mooks. There's a reason why it's a trope in stories and movies and TV shows. They're mooks. They don't matter. But if you make them matter by giving them magic powers and a backstory, your characters are going to latch on to that.
Yes, that happened to us.
Okay, they're going to latch on to that.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
As an example, we had a Scion session we're trying to find out, of course, what the Big Bad was, and our storyteller gave that little information about that big fan base. He suddenly props it up and it runs somewhere else.
Yeah.
We went there where we were not supposed to go there. He tells us after half the team was almost dead, and he saves us by a throw. Big armored guy saved us. Guys, you were not supposed to go there. So why did you bring it out?
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'd like to point out that this is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Yes.
But if you do that, be prepared to meet the customer needs. The customer wants that.
Yes.
Yes. Hey, you brought it up. So,
Assuming
that's what they want.
that there's one person who wants to skin whatever you kill in a trophy.
But if you want them to focus on what you want, don't give them the opportunity.
Yeah.
And just lean it. Or rather, if you want to add draw, make it like it's not a big deal. Like draw is something that you expect. Yes.
After all it's said and done, you're the page master. You didn't what they see, what they
Exactly.
And go to the
So,
Underdark.
but here's the thing. Look at the next slide I have here. Guys, look at the next slide. If players are focusing too much on the milieu, use that to your advantage. Use a particular setting point to isolate them everywhere. So, for example, let's go back to Return Emperor Strikes Back. Imagine this RPG setting. This story, okay? I'm the DM, okay? You are Luke Skywalker. Your speeder has just crashed, okay? There's an AT-AT, a boss, come to your radio. You're on the encounter. What do you do? Okay? The radio signal for a bombing is there. You think you have just enough time to roll the dice, grab it, and launch a bombing and destroy the AT-AT. No, I want to get my lightsaber and go there. Why? Because it sounds cool. I have a lightsaber. Okay, let's do that. Roll, critical hit. Oh, guess what? You managed to get up. Use your lightsaber, put the grenade. Oh, guess what? The whole AT falls down. Okay. Wow, that's so cool. But he seems really interested in that brief story I pointed about the Jedi. Okay, I got him attacked. How will you get out of the now? You can, you're frozen because you were captured by the ice giant, the Wampa. All right, are you going to roll to escape artist? No, I want to see if I can, will that thing back in. Okay, so this player seems very interested in Jedi. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put an apparition. But guess what? Guess what happens? What happens there? You use the medium to guess what? You now put it somewhere else. You just turn it into a character story.
Amazing.
Diba? So if you think your players are focusing too much, you can use it to your advantage to bring it somewhere else. Okay? And that's can be an interesting way of looking. If you look at it from that aspect, how the DM swerved it. Because think about it, Empire Strikes Back. The story did not move, but it's something that happened. Yes.
So far, with everything you've discussed, a lot of the responsibility for the story relies on GM.
Yes.
Shouldn't that responsibility be shouldered by the players as well?
We'll get to that. Right. Alright. Actually, wait. Okay. But we are going to the collaborative approach now. Okay? Now, a collaboration with the pieces happens with what I call psychological subtleties and covered basis outline for the 4 aspects. Let's talk about what I mean by psychological subtleties. We've been dealing with this already, okay? But psychological subtleties or the virtue of not giving players an initial quest. Okay, now we're still talking very about as a DM. Why? Let's go back. It's all about the mini story, really, because it's something we're used to. When you give your players an initial quest, let's face it, we do that, right? They meet the king of the town or the mayor. They give them a problem. Okay, let's deal with it. Okay, but what's the problem of that initial quest? You just, if you do that, you just set up your characters for a mini story without realizing it. Why? They're entering an unfamiliar territory in the dungeon, but they don't care, right? They don't see things are they're not familiar to them. But how? Let's say how do you if you remove that? We now have a richer idea of how things go. Okay, so if in a mini story you give a quest, because really, look at the mini story. What do they say? When does a mini story begin? When they enter a familiar territory. Why do they enter a familiar territory? Because they're told to go there. Alright? Diba? But in an event story, what do they say? What was our singa? Were you listening? Something disorder happened, right? Here's how you do a good event story. Don't give them a quest. Make them enjoy. Okay, I'm relaxing on the inn, having a beer. Something happens in the background. Zombies suddenly attack. Where did these zombies come from? So you're escaping. You have a certain quest. They're running away, so on and so forth. Okay, and then they meet up with people, and then who tells them what happened? Okay, you just gave them an idea of the disorder, the chaos happening. I just explained the Walking Dead. Okay, which is more something about event and character. So the point is, I would suggest you don't give an initial quest. Let them experience if it's an event story. Character stories, it's a little bit more of a character piece. It doesn't really matter at that point. Idea stories, because the tech, they're given a question, but generally you don't get much out of that. But in all aspects, okay. So the big difference between the 4 is an idea story. You're given something, but not enough to go to a dungeon. Okay. So what's the big difference? In a mini story, let's say that the story is what's the most classic D&D trope? Dragon collect terrorizing the city, and they have a hoard of gold in the dungeon, right? That's the most classic one. Okay. Mini story will tell you. The mini story will have you visit the king, and the king will say, "This dragon is killing all our livestock. Please stop it, and you can have any treasure they have." You go there. We just set up for a mini story. Idea story is going to be something like, okay, players, something is killing our livestock. We don't know what it is. Can you find out? Alright? There's a big difference there. If it's a character story, okay, someone's killing our livestock. What now?
Someone's killing your livestock.
Yeah. Actually, no, or it could be something like this. The dragon nearby is killing the livestock, but the dragon is really my best friend who I've ventured a lot with.
You're the escalated.
Alright? Now, event stories, here's the big one. Event stories are different. How will an event story start? It will not start with the king telling you to get. It will start with you, okay, experiencing the dragon attack.
Yes.
Okay. Getting killed. So, it kind of on those ideas. Okay, so what does that mean? When you want to subtly lead them to a certain direction, there are certain things you can do. I mentioned some. 1, giving quests. The right way to give a quest. Okay? 2, okay, how they dealt with the setting. I mentioned the other side. Let's go to the other one I did, which is I call it the covered basis outline.
Sorry, we will have to go there, sir.
Yes, okay. Yeah, okay. I'll finish this now. But anyway, what is the covered basis outline? Or the virtual shifting the focus to what the players are most interested in. What do I mean by that? This is where the collaborative approach comes in. What do I mean by collaboration? What if you prepare this whole story and then they went somewhere else? Okay. Then you come up with what you call a core-based outline, where you create a general outline for all 4 aspects: the milieu, the idea, the character, and the event, and then you just see where they go. If they're focusing on the idea, okay, they don't care about everything else, let's go there. Let's go to the character. Okay, so the point is, you're now collaborating, you're seeing where they go with it.
Yeah.
And then that's the story you have. You make a general idea for it. I'll give you an example. Let's talk about undead, zombies, right? Let's say you make this story. There's a zombie plague because a necromancer has come to town, raising the dead, attacking people, causing more people to come in. And you make this whole story of event of this annihilation wave of zombies coming in. It's an event. Your whole point, the goal, defeat the necromancer, destroy the necromancer, what? Restore order. But what if they focus, okay, you have this merchant where you buy weapons, suddenly they're focusing on this merchant and they don't really care about it.
Character.
Okay, they're on the character, or rather they're focusing there, okay, they don't care about the they care about this one. Then the story becomes about how you help this person escape. And that's the story. It's all about him reuniting with his loved ones, but you try to, and it's all about, okay, instead of trying to stop the necromancer, it's about trying to get to that one boat and leave. Again, it's the Walking Dead example.
Yeah.
Okay? That doesn't mean you give up the necromancer. You nested in that part. After you leave, after the character leaves, okay, thank you so much for saving my family. Along the way, maybe one of his children died. Okay, what are you going to do now, my friend? I am going to avenge your fallen son, and I will find the necromancer. End the story next session.
Yeah.
Okay? So you nested it right there. Okay? What if they wanted to focus on the idea? How did the zombie come about? They keep asking you, how did the zombies come about? Why is this happening? Okay, then they're not too interested in the necromancer. Let's pull it back. Okay? They're now investigating how the plague came about. Now they're investigating the town where it first started, patient 0. They're going around, they're finding the court, and then they find the necromancer. But if they're focusing on fighting and trying to stop, you notice from their wording that they say, yeah,
That's what
yeah, if there's an event story, and they're interested in trying to find the solution, trying to beat where it goes, then it's the original card story. But they're focusing on trying to finding out what's happening. They keep focusing on, okay, I want to look at the body. Okay, you can pull back the necromancer. You worked so hard for hours creating the boss. Pull that back for the next session. Make the big event now, finding the source. And the source will be this evil well that he poisoned. Okay? If it's a character story, okay, it could be just simply about them dealing with the zombie effect. Now you have Rick Grimes right there. Okay? Like I said, if your characters are too powerful, you may want to make it a character story. Because at that point, it doesn't matter. You can beat the necromancer, you can beat the zombie. But it's about, okay, I need to go fight the necromancer, but there's a village of people out there who currently need help. It becomes a little point in that idea. Okay? And at that point, this is really what comes into the point. Do you want the players to be adventurers, explorers, strangers? If that's your pull, that's a mini story. If you want them to be researchers, now, again, you've got to remember what's different between them. In an idea story, they're not the people saving the day. They're the people, the Bothans who died, who find the truth. Right? In fact, if your party, your friends, are the type of people who love main characters, you can make that to do separate stories. They're the type of characters who are there to find the truth, and there are characters, now that the truth has been found, next session, it's about defending it. Don't put it in the same session. Okay? Biggest example, don't do what J.K. Rowling did, which is that about finding the Horcruxes of Voldemort, not in one book.
Yeah.
Okay? Make the Horcruxes find it, and then make this big whole event about, okay, final battle. Okay? With Voldemort being the last part. If you want them to be character stories, it's irrelevant actually. It's really about, where the camera goes to the face, takes the Revenant, and seeing him grunt and looking outside. It's that. Okay? Because really, it's about how he deals with it. It's irrelevant whether you succeed or fail at all. If you want to reinvent, they have to be the influencers. Okay? So, one last example. World War II, here's stories set in that. If you wanted the people to defeat the enemies, they're the generals or the people stopping Hitler or some whoever the general is. But if you want a more character-driven story, well done. They're the people just trying to survive the horrors of war. Sorry. If it's an event story here, if it's an influencer mini story, you're not the person stopping the war. You're the person trying to survive it.
Right.
Right? It's a story not about beating the enemy. It's about just trying to get away from this horrible place. Characters, same thing, but it's not about getting away. It's about, okay, what did I deal? What's my attitude regarding this? Ideal story, okay, what's causing this? Okay, so what does that mean? If you have to collaborate with your players, you got to know usually what I do is I create all 4 aspects, develop all 4, but I don't use them all. I already know I'm not going to use all 4. Whatever they latch onto, that's the focus. The rest, I'll use na lang on next session. And then, don't end it in a cliffhanger, end it by developing that story, then you move on. Okay? So that's basically it. If you have any questions, but we went over time a little bit, but I'm open to questions you have, particularly your own particular stories. None? Yes.
So a rescue mission would fall under an event?
That depends. Why are you rescuing this person?
No, if you're being tasked to find missing person and then it ends up that person is
Okay, once again, if you are just an adventurer who just came in town and to enter a dungeon, that's basically a mini story. But if you build it in such a way that, okay, people are dying and what we need is this healer and she's the only one who has the power to heal this because she's the only priest in Miles. So you first started not with the quest, but okay, you see people die around you, you're spending encounters trying to find the things the medicine that they need. But then now you've experienced the chaos, the disorder. Then it becomes an event story. Now I know why I have to rescue this person. Okay? So it matters how you frame the story in the beginning. Okay? What else? Any more questions?
I have to go to another.
Yeah, sorry for going off time, but thank you so much for coming in. You're supposed to feedback, so forms. Thank you so much.